So let's jump right in. So we're going to talk about remote first teams and what they're going to do. The rough agenda will be I'll give you kind of some context of who I am, why you should even maybe care what I say. And then we're going to go through some of the perks and pitfalls in a short-term and long-term, and I'll wrap it up with some more managerial stuff. So the important thing you need to know about me, if there's one thing, is I have a very cute dog. Her name's Sundance, she's 60 pounds. I have a captive audience for 35 or so minutes. You're gonna look at pictures of my dog. That's just gonna happen. But you're here to know about the work version of me. I have been pretty mercurial and curious on things. I bounce around a lot. The polite way is curious. The other way people describe it is indecisive. So I started in defense, working in embedded systems a long time ago, all of it based in the Bay Area over in the US. Jumped over to the Middle East for a couple years working as a remote employee, went back to the Bay, and ended up at Netlify. The big thing is that I really grew from leading very local teams in the defense sector into building remote ones. And that's all because of my work at Netlify now. I was the first employee there. We were just 3 of us in a room. I've been there 3.5 years. We're headquartered in the Bay. We're somewhere around 60-ish people. That's changing a lot. And about 60% of that's remote. In particular, my umbrella is 11 of us, 9 of which are remote or not Bay Area, spread over 4 time zones in 5 countries. Heavily North America, heavily in the EU. And why that's important, or why I joined Netlify, is I really wanted to build some cool stuff. At my core, I am a builder. And to me, that also extends into building teams. And one of the opportunities I was going to get at Netlify is the ability to build a remote first team. My guidelines when I was doing that were really coming into, or my principles were that your time zone doesn't determine your skill. A lot of the time it can determine your opportunity, but it doesn't mean that you're any better or any worse. And what I really wanted to focus on when I was building the team is inclusion, coverage, and pace. Inclusion being, I think that you should have more voices in the room, more people talking, and that's important. And that means from across the world. Coverage, I'm talking to a room full of SREs. Follow the sun coverage is a really nice thing because I want to sleep. And that's just essential when you're running an always-on platform. And then pace. A lot of us talk about getting more hours in the day, and the best way to do that is follow the sun. But that doesn't just mean have more people in more time zones. It means that you actually have to enable them to have the autonomy and trust in them to do things without you. Because if I'm not there, or if I'm the roadblock and they have to wait for me to wake up to okay a PR, I didn't gain any time. And then really, the web's a global space. We're a company that helps serve websites. Why not us? Cool. So hopefully, I convinced you a little bit of to follow. We're going to jump in and change gears a little bit to talk about perks and pitfalls. I'm going to try to make, some of it's going to be very philosophical, but I'm going to try to make sure that each one is grounded in techniques that I've used. And that means that the big caveat is it's things I've run into. It's things that I've done. Your mileage may vary. So the perks of being remote are pretty straightforward. They're really rooted in this idea of flexibility. You roll out of bed, you brush your teeth, maybe you don't, and you grab your laptop and you're online. You don't have to work, you can work from home, you can work from the couch, you can do any of that. If you want to work during the morning, if you want to work in the evening, take lunch, go to the gym, just nap. You're able to do that. And all you have to do is jive with your team. And the other big part is that it can be distraction-free in the sense that you control your distractions. One of my best friends, she loves to listen to NPR while she works. I absolutely cannot do that. I have another friend that likes silence and a guy that loves classical music. They get to choose that and not have it mandated to them by the room. But all that flexibility comes at a cost. Isolation being kind of at the root of it. I go many days where the only person I talk to is my dog. I don't actually have to use my words out loud. I'm slacking with my friends, I'm responding to email, I'm texting. I am suddenly surprised 4 days later when I actually have to respond to a friend out loud. It messes with your psyche a little bit. The other big thing is people tend to work too much. That line between work and life becomes really troublesome. You're sitting there on the couch watching TV, playing on your phone at the same time, paying attention to neither one, and somebody pings you, and you think, why not? Let me just respond to them real quick. And very quickly, you're working, not relaxing. This is absolutely a recipe for burnout, for exhaustion, for really just frustration overall. And as a manager, that can easily lead to churn. And another way, you get blocked. You're waiting for me to wake up. You're waiting for another team to come online. You need a PR, you need an official answer. And the next thing you know, you have to wait 4 hours, or maybe the next day, or maybe their weekend started already, or it's a holiday, and that thing's not shipping. This is just, it's an insanely frustrating thing to run into a lot. So how do we make that better? Here are some of my ideas. I believe in developing regional autonomy. This means that I enable an area and I hire such and staff an area so that they can operate kind of independently. And we work together very much to get onto the same page. And then I trust them to make the right call. They're working on a project, they know what it is. That doesn't mean that a project's solely owned by one time zone. It doesn't mean that they don't operate in conjunction with other ones. It just means that they have the ability to unblock themselves in most cases. There are gonna be times when they do need to wait for somebody, maybe with the right admin, but that's not always. Building community outside your team is very important. Usually a lot of us will be on small teams or we're shifting teams. And making a teammate feel more included in the company helps with retention, helps them stay engaged, helps them really not be as frustrated and as isolated throughout their time. Fighting hero culture. It's very easy to think, like I was saying, you're on your phone at night and you pick it up. Encourage people to be offline. Encourage them to take the break. Encourage them not to be always lifting. That means that you need to fight that drive in yourself and that requirement in your company. And then clarifying responsibility. This helps with regional autonomy. If I know what is in my purview versus your purview, I can operate and act in that way. I can make that call and not know that maybe I shouldn't. So these are all your great things, but I promised you actionable things. So like, how do we do this? My techniques are, you want to develop some cross-team work. This is to build, we use Donut for building random connections to people. It pairs people up randomly, gets them talking for 15 minutes every couple weeks. Sometimes it's about work, sometimes about your pets, maybe the latest Marvel movie. Really, it's just to help build friendship and community in the company. Building conferences, scheduling people to go to conferences together. This is really helpful, especially when you bring people from different parts of the world together for a conference. At Netlify, we have this advantage that we run a conference in the East Coast, West Coast, and EU. That means that what we use each one of those conferences to bring everyone in those regions together. It's a pretty front-end heavy conference, and so we still bring marketing. We bring DevRel, we bring all of our back-end SREs together, and we get them talking. And it's a really good way to build that collaboration and build that community across them. Plus, they're just fun. And then informal team chats. This I usually pair as breakfast with a team or a meal with the team. Lunch with SREs, lunch with marketing, breakfast or coffee with another team. Really what this is a time when we schedule it, we talk about like, hey, here's what we're up to these days, but any questions? And it's open to the entire company. If you have a question for my team of why we're doing something or what this technical is, go ahead. If you don't, you just share a meal with your coworkers, and that's totally fine. And eating on camera is weird, but it's totally okay. The next thing I suggest is learn to ignore things. And in contrast to that, my first suggestion is going to be a little counter, and it'll make sense later. Always at people. Don't sit there and put spaces in their names, dots in their name. Always at them. Because if you wake up to suddenly 300 messages in Slack, a whole team has been working most of their day while you've been sleeping. They've been talking. It's very easy when you're skimming to just miss a message. Don't see a thread, any number of things. So if you want me to see it, at me. Make sure that I do it. And I'll make sure I get to that. Maybe it's just an FYI, or maybe I need to take action. But the flip side of that is make sure you set your working hours. Make sure your phone does not buzz you at 8 p.m. When you are offline, be offline. That way, when I do at you, you don't actually jump online to help me. Please don't do that. That's not the point. Another one that my team knows very, very thoroughly, it's usually one of the first conversations I have with anyone on my team. They DM me once and I say, stop DMing me. Don't do that. Talk in the channel. And it takes a little bit of time, it takes some encouragement, it takes building trust and people being okay with being wrong in public or learning in public. But I use that very much because it helps with that regional autonomy. Because a lot of the times you don't actually need my answer. You need the answer. Maybe there's somebody else in your time zone that knows it. Maybe if they don't, they should, and now I can tell them. I can provide that context to multiple people. So don't DM me. It also gets you out of this weird game of telephone where like I talk to one person and then we talk about the state and I talk to another one and then suddenly in 3 months I'm talking about a project where I only talked to actually about half the people. So that's a terrible way. Don't DM me unless it's actually personal. And then in your communication, specify the urgency. This can wait till tomorrow. This can wait until you wake up, or I really need an answer, oh my God. Any of that. Because that helps me then if I happen to look at Slack or if I happen to see my email come through, I know it's fine. I'll deal with this later. Okay, I will work. Any of that. Document more. I know, cliche. We all say we should document more. We all say we do document enough, and we all have out-of-date documentation. But remote teams thrive on good engineering discipline. That means take the extra time to share why and the context around something. Your PR should have a little bit more information in it than you ultimately think is really necessary because you just know it. Well, the other team may not. The person reading it may not. You, your future self, will not remember why you did that. Help your future self be a better detective. I have this awesome ability, or I was talking with an engineer about a year ago, and we were looking at this PR, and he was introducing a shallow copy of a struct. And I was like, that's okay. But right above it is almost the same line of code. And I was like, that's weird. We should understand why that happens, because that's just problematic. So we both agreed, and we start digging down through the git blame, and we end up on the commit that introduces it. The comment is work in progress. The PR that introduced that one line. The entire comment of the PR was fixes issue. We spent the entire next 2 days trying to figure out what that issue was, you know. Would it have taken them an extra 2 minutes to write a paragraph? Yeah. Would that have been frustrating at the time? Probably. Do it. I have this ability. We started brainstorming doc sections in our stuff, in our company. I find the CTO or CEO randomly when they're making coffee. I do this all the time because I need answers sometimes, or sometimes we're just friends. And what ended up happening is we would share technical ideas. We'd banter for the 3 minutes that we're standing there waiting for the coffee machine. And I would go back to my desk, think it over, and then run into them again. A month later, I go to my team and I say, hey, you know that thing we've been talking about for months, that project? We're finally gonna do it. It's gonna be great. And they go, I have no idea what you're talking about. Like, what is this? And then they bring up a ton of issues with it when I explain it to them. I'm like, wow, really should have seen that coming. So I had to break that habit in myself. Sit down, write down your idea. Take the time. It helps you clarify your idea. It helps you understand what you're gonna do. It helps build context with people so they can, in their own time, kind of follow along. And it can be very formal. We had one of our engineers wrote essentially enterprise-level documentation. And it was the way that they helped shape out the idea and what the API and everything would look like. That was wonderful. We also had some where people were like, could we just like use Redis there, make it better? And both are fine. Both are really just a place to just have an idea, write it down. You thought of something in the shower, write it down, let's talk about it. And so because we're remote, that means to be documented, something people can process async. So we use that kind of unstructured area. So we're going to change gears a little bit and talk about the longer-term sustainability of a career in remote and some of the issues that come up there. A lot of it, the perks are pretty, again, straightforward. They continue on that theme of flexibility. You have access to a global pool, and you also have a lot more flexibility in the long run. There are a lot of tech sectors in a lot of regions and a lot of countries which are booming right now. There's some that are budding. There's some that have absolutely none. And you, as a strong remote worker, really want access to whichever one works for you. So That's what you should do. And so that's one thing that being a strong remote worker gives you. The long-term flexibility, a lot of my jobs before Netlify and before Palantir, I had to be in the Bay Area. Like that's where they were. That's where the office was, and if I wanted to be a part of it in any kind of growth potential, I had to be there. So that kind of sucks. Counter to that, one of my best friends, him and I worked together for a couple of years, he was born and raised in the Bay Area. He just didn't like it anymore. He was done with it, he'd done it his whole life, and he wanted to try other things. He had a remote job, and what it really enabled is that him and his partner, they came up with this crazy scheme where they were gonna bounce through a bunch of US cities, about 3 to 6 months in each one, and try to find the one that felt right for them to settle down in the long run. It sounded horrible to me, but it was something he loved. So they did that. And the only way that they were able to do that is because he had a remote position. What I mean is that his work, his place of work, stopped being as much of a forcing function in his life decisions. It still mattered, but he actually had a lot more range, and he could not have his work be the defining characteristic of a lot of his life choices. But again, it comes at a cost. I don't mean to say that this is what's going to happen. What I've actually seen is, more often than not, this is a very unhealthy remote culture when these things happen. So this isn't me peering at my crystal ball and saying, this is your future. It's more saying, these are some of the risks that you run into. These are a lot of the problems that I've seen kind of emerge. You can run into a lot of stagnation in your growth. This is because you don't get the feedback or the opportunities as a remote person. If that means you're gonna be more of an IC, you don't have the opportunity to maybe design problems. If you want to do people management, you're not actually given the opportunity because you're not in the office. You can run into this time and time again, and that's insanely frustrating. Being treated like a second-class citizen, and that means that your ideas aren't heard, your feedback isn't taken into account, and really, you're treated as just somebody that we ship a request to, you're a contractor, put your hands on the keyboard, get the thing done that I told you to do, and move on. That's not a way to build community. That's not a way to build a team going forward, and that's a way to just have people not want to work with you. Imposter syndrome, I have found to be far, far more prevalent in remoties. That means it's because they just don't have that feedback loop. They don't have any kind of stuff other than the feedback in your PR or an occasional, nice, thumbs up here. They don't actually know if they're doing well or horribly. And they're not in the room when you're at lunch and you say, wow, that team shipped this thing. That was really tough. They did a good job. They have no idea you said that. They're at home. They don't sit before a meeting and say, well, what are you up to these days? Oh, wow, that's interesting. So it's very easy to get very negative about yourself, doubt your abilities. So imposter syndrome is a real thing that you have to contend with. So let's try to make it a little better. A lot of my team will also hear me say, trust people, not characters. A lot of our job can be very frustrating, and a lot of external frustrations can come in. And it's very easy in those situations when you don't have that personal link, when you're not seeing that person day to day outside of the work context, to build a characterization of them, to start to understand them in a slightly different way. When I worked in one of my first defense jobs, we worked with a team in Utah. It was a company we acquired, and they just had a very different culture for how things are gonna work. And very much there became an us and them between us and the home office and them over there. We started to think of them as cowboys, and they would just do reckless things. And they thought of us as these staunch bureaucrats. It was defense. They weren't wrong. And really what that meant is that suddenly they had an idea, and I immediately started writing it off. I started being like, this can't be good, it came from them. I started believing in that characterization of them, instead of remembering there's a person behind that PR. There's somebody that, is doing the best they can. They're probably not there, they're probably not an idiot, and they're probably not there to make you particularly frustrated. That's just not a reality. Inclusion. Ideas can come from anywhere, and you really should strive to make sure all people are heard. And what I mean there is that encouraging your coworkers, making sure that you take the time with them to figure out what they're working on, what you're doing, help give them ideas. As an engineer, write your ideas down, circulate them, advocate for them, advocate for your peers. And then celebrate the small things. Yes, When we ship a major production to, or a major release to production, there's a party, there's some pins, there's a t-shirt that comes out, any of that. Celebrate the smaller things. That helps fight that imposter syndrome in everyone and makes everyone's life just a little bit easier. It's also no lift for you. So here's some of the actual techniques that I would use. Like I said, be supportive. Say it out loud. Make sure that you actually engage with people. All of our jobs are to be critical. We have to look at a PR. We have to debate the trade-offs in something. We have to be assuming failure, and then how do we plan for failure? Take the time to think, oh, actually, I'm really happy that I work with this person because I have that back and forth. Wow, that's encouraging. And you think it, take the time to actually say it. So we in Slack have a celebrate and thanks channel. The celebrate is for, they got this PR out, they got over this hurdle, they wrote this blog post, or any number of little things from a major production, good job team, to a finally figured out how that deadlock worked. And then a thanks channel, because there's a lot of times that you're actually appreciative of people. It can be for thanks for pairing with me, thanks for unblocking this, thanks for it, or this, thanks for being here. It's real nice. Take the time. I believe in oversharing, in my professional life. I email everyone, outside engineering. I'm a big advocate for transparency. And a good example of this is we encourage a lot of our teams to write monthly summaries, and email it to the entire company. And it's, wins, misses, what's coming up, some numbers. And I include a cute picture of a dog at the end just because that's what I want to do. And we send it to everyone. We encourage everyone to be in these talks. And that's because I don't expect you to read it. I don't care if you read it, honestly, but you should make that choice for yourself. I don't need to be the one that makes the choice of whether or not that information is available to you. Unstructured idea talks. Engineers often want to have their ideas heard and followed up on. And what that really means is you want to encourage that. And if you're in a remote position, you're talking to your dog, your partner, the wall, about your ideas. And sometimes that doesn't actually action. So making a place where people can bring some ideas up is great. The way we do it is we hold bi-weekly architecture talks. It's me, the CTO, the CEO, the team, but it's actually open to anyone. And we encourage anyone in engineering from any of these fields to come in and bring a problem, bring an idea, talk about a shower thought. And it's really a safe space to come with your ideas and talk about stuff that isn't on the roadmap necessarily. Maybe it's something that's frustrating, or maybe it's something that you ran into and, you touched it last and no one else knew it. So bring that up, come talk about it. And I really like to do those in a improv style, where it's yes and. So take the ideas that somebody has and try to run with them. Don't do it in a necessarily combative or here's why not. I'm not saying always say that this is a wonderful idea, but give the person the benefit of the doubt and try to work with them and try to figure out what is good about their idea. And then company-wide scheduled remote days. I think this has been one of the biggest wins for our company, and it's been since day 4 of the company. We take Tuesday and Thursday where the entire company works from remotely. None of us come into the office. And what that does is help us understand the pain of being remote. The times when you're in a meeting and you're trying to voice up, but you're on a tiny polycom and nobody hears you. Or suddenly there's enough lag and you're being talked over. Or somebody's drawing on a board, but that is not enough ink on that board to actually see it. If you don't feel that pain, you will not address it as a systemic company. If it's easier to walk over to your colleague next to them, even though they're probably not the best choice to answer your question, you're gonna. And that engineering discipline's slowly gonna slip. And so by forcing us to be working remote from Tuesday and Thursday, that meant that we embrace those ideals because everyone feels them, everyone works with them. And it's very, very helpful for maintaining a positive remote culture. It also makes my job a lot easier because I have a team heavily in the EU. I can get up earlier. They don't have to stay on later. It makes scheduling a lot easier when I don't have a commute and when they don't. So I get some of the flexibility perks, and we also encourage a better culture. Cool. So the next one, I'm not going to give as much of a actionable thing. It's a little more philosophical. It's a little more of the incidents and problems I've run into. My manager perspective. So the big thing for me is we want to foster a culture of autonomy, trust, and accountability. The way that I do this is that we start writing very clear policies and job descriptions for people so that they understand what's in their realm, what's in ours, and when they're enabled and when they need to seek help. A really good incident we had, or a good example of this, was about 6 months ago. We had an incident. It dragged on for far too long, and it was mostly because we didn't remove that customer. Everyone identified the customer really quickly, and we didn't zap them. And it's because the people on call and people on the incident didn't know if they had the authority to. They were paying us a little bit. Does that mean I can zap them? Do I have to fight for DDoS? Do I not? What's in my decision-making skill? And what they ended up having to do is defer until somebody with the authority woke up. That dragged out the incident for far longer than it should have. And that was what came from one of the retros, is that we didn't have a clear responsibility. Everyone was saying, maybe we should do this. And no one said, yes, we can. So what came from that is us building a policy around our incidents where it was a lot clearer that said, you, as the on-call engineer, it's your call. All of this is your problem. You do not, the CEO can maybe override you, but they're not going to. But you decide when the incident starts. You decide when we tweet about it. You decide when it's over. And if you need to take a customer offline, here are the guidelines. Here's when and where you should. It's your decision. And we as a company enable you to make that choice. I want you to, don't wait for me. Don't wait for somebody to wake up. You have the authority, and I trust you to make that right call. Writing project docs. Getting the team to write them is very helpful. I sit down and try to work with the team a lot and try to figure out, hey, here's what we're going to do. Here's some of the approaches I have. Here, help me figure it out. Here are the questions that we have. Getting them to write the doc helps bring in that ownership and that enthusiasm. And it's now their project. It's something they've thought about, and you can really help get that ball rolling. It also is helpful because if you define what's in scope, and more importantly, what is definitely not in scope, they can act with a lot more autonomy outside of your purview. They know when something is just completely off the table or not, and they don't have to wait for somebody to say that to them. It also comes into clear ownership. Identify the person that is responsible and accountable for the outcomes. And I don't mean this in a punitive way. I don't mean if we don't get 500 signups, you're getting fired. No. I mean in that they know that they're going to be the ones owning where this goes. They know when something's going to be a problem or an issue. And they know when to raise it as a bigger problem because they're the one really owning it. And it gives them that autonomy and trust in them to really drive good outcomes for the company. And then when in doubt, take an iterable approach. That's always what I push for. It helps you steer more agilely over time. Hiring is hard. Like in engineering, it is just straight up hard. It's difficult to get hired, it's difficult to hire, and then remote doesn't make it any easier. Yes, I get access to a global talent pool. I can hire from anywhere in the world. I also get access to a global talent pool. Crap, what am I gonna do? How do I interview them? How do I balance this? And then a distinct problem for a small company like us is I have to balance time zones. I have to figure out how am I gonna get enough staff over there so I don't isolate someone on a team? Or how do I make sure that this is balanced such that we're able to get coverage for our customers the entire time? You have to, I have 3 seniors over in the EU and I have 1 junior here. Well, that's not gonna work super well. So I have to be very careful. An incident we had with this was we were looking at hiring some SREs in the APAC time zones because it would give us 24/5 coverage. And that would be awesome. Everyone likes to sleep better. But me and the team sat down and just had a real talk about it where it was, can we support that well? The answer came out to no. We wouldn't be able to give that person really the experience that they want. They'd be fully isolated. They would have minimal overlap with the entire company from all the other time zones. And so we were just like, we're not there yet. We will get there. We will, at some point, I will be hiring in that space if the growth keeps going. But that needs to be a much more careful decision that we make over time. Another is that for some of my roles, I have some really great candidates in the EU. I can't hire them. Not yet. I need to balance that out with my North American time zones because I need to worry about that pace. I need to make sure that we're actually able to extend the daylight by following the sun. And if the entire afternoon in the North America time zones can't be shipped in because everyone's offline, as they should be, that's a problem. When I get to a larger company, once we build up enough staff, once I have 10 people in all these time zones, I'll have a lot more flexibility. I'll be able to bring on 2 people here, lose 2 people there, any of that. But we're small, and that makes it a lot harder to make that choice. And the big last point, you don't scale. Both as a manager, as an IC, as an engineer, you do not scale. This means that you need to learn to ignore things. You need to learn you have to trust other people with. You have to learn to enable your other team to say, this is not my problem. They can do this. They can handle this. I don't need to jump in there. And you don't scale, also to me, is a reminder that this is hard. Remote makes it hard in certain ways. It makes it easier in other ways. But engineering is hard. And generally, you should probably cut yourself a little more slack. Thanks. I'll take questions. Sure.
We have quite a few minutes for Q&A. Yay.
Thank you. It was a very good talk, especially since I'm not very used to remote working. As a manager, I do have 2 questions. The first one would be about, so you mentioned not hiring in the EU at the moment, but you might have hired outside of the US. Mm-hmm. So have you run into situations about employment regulations that you needed to keep a close eye on?
Yeah.
And the second question I will have is about performance management. And did you ever have to deal with it, and how did you?
Yeah, we have run into a handful of different times issues with local laws. So right now, because we're small, what we do is we actually hire most of our remote people as contractors. And they're on long-term contracts with a guarantee, and that's just a formality in HR. It's because we're not big enough to actually hire any of the firms, because there are a lot of firms in different countries that will employ the person through them. So we don't engage with them yet. We're getting to that point with enough people remote that might be shifting, but that's kind of a bigger pain. And to your point about performance, it's almost no different for me dealing with performance of an employee relative to them being local or remote. You have to have the same conversations. You have to have the same discussions. You have to have the same candor and transparency with them. So all of the good managerial practices, which Google will tell you all about, still apply in remote. You just have to do it over VTC. Don't do it over Slack. Don't have hard conversations over an email. But I don't think any of us were going to do that in the first place. And if you were, you should consider different things. So just the same stuff works. All you do it is just over a Hangout.
Thank you.
How do you solve problem of fair compensation? We know that cost of living in different parts of the world is different, so how do you make sure that remote and local workers are treated fairly?
That is hard. That is definitely one of the challenges. I was considering talking about it in here, but it's a pretty long and nuanced conversation about it. Because when you talk about it, the goal of the company is to make people have a good life. Pay them such that they don't have to worry about these things, make them so that their lives are easier and more acceptable. But you do have, that doesn't mean pay everyone Bay Area salaries, because that just also doesn't scale, especially in a small company. So we end up paying regional salaries, and we pay in a certain percentile. We do research in the region and figure out what those are, and then peg people with the level of engineer that they are with the cost in that area. And so there are a handful of services that we use that have databases that track these things, and we use those and rely on those to figure out where our compensation lines are.
Any other questions?
Hey, for tech people, working remotely is quite obvious, but for salesperson and customer success stuff, do you also work remotely for these jobs?
Our entire customer support team is remote. All of them do not work, almost none of them work in the entire place.
And how do you convince salespeople to not get into the same place every day?
Our sales is pretty heavily based in headquarters right now, but we're trying to work on that. We do have some of them are remote, but most of their companies aren't headquartered in the Bay. So they're taking voice and Zoom meetings all the time. So where they're taking it from doesn't really matter. And so they're able to do it. And as long as you start building in some of the same engineering principles of documenting, following up on tickets, following up on your Salesforce stuff, the exact same stuff can apply. And it's pretty straightforward. Yeah, you're not able to just lean over to somebody and banter about a customer or figure that out, but you can jump on a phone call, and that's pretty much what the difference is.
Any other questions? Oh, there we go.
Hi, great talk.
Thanks.
I've got a question about diversity. Have you seen increase in diversity since allowing people to work remotely and generally getting better candidates as a result of that as well?
Diversity is a very nuanced discussion. If we're talking about gender diversity, I have seen it be I've seen it be easier, but one of the big perks is that I have people from 5 countries on my team. Like, I have got a lot of diversity when it comes to that, and backgrounds and experience. A lot of them come from different, not all of them are like classically trained engineers or anything like that. And so we have seen a lot of that. We also do see in our candidate pools, by opening it up more, we do actually see a gender diversity change as well.
Thank you.
We have time for maybe one more question. Going once, going twice. Okay, I'm gonna try to reach you.
Gives me a moment to sip some water.
Yay! This is my workout.
Project. Do you find that you're able to be more proactive about burnout? In other words, recognizing the signs and helping your teammates, coworkers, medewerkers, we say in Dutch, helping them deal with it and maybe prevent it from happening?
I find that it's actually a little more difficult remote because I don't get that interpersonal conversation. I don't get as much time outside of a meeting with a point. So I find it kind of difficult to gauge that, and that's something that I work with a lot on my one-on-ones to try to get an assessment of them for how are they feeling kind of overall. Not necessarily about this project, but things like that. And when you start to notice it, one of the big things that I have found in remote is that people work too much. And that's where you start having to be very careful, and you can be a lot more intentional around it. And making it okay to say, get offline, this can wait. Why are you on at 8 p.m.? Go away. That's a good part, I think, and building that trust and candor.
Cool. Thank you very much, Ryan.
Of course.